when I looked at this story and I read through it, it describes a journey, and I've drawn this on a map here. Basically, this is Stockholm here, and they went down here round the coast of Sweden, and then round the coast of Norway. This is Spitsbergen here. This is Franz Josef Land here, and then the North Pole is basically here. And they claim to have stopped on an island a couple of days after they left Franz Josef Land, or a week or something after Franz Josef Land. And after leaving Franz Josef Land, they claim to have spent one day on an island north of there. That island is not on any map. That island is not there. So we can't verify that part of the story. We can't verify the island, we can't verify the ship, and we can't really say that they came out of the South Pole. It doesn't really make, that part doesn't make any sense. So, you don't really need to write. So that Olaf Jansson's story, to me, probably not true. I can't completely rule it out, but I don't think it's true. Now then, what about these polar holes that you might have heard of? Different sizes are given for the polar holes. Some say they're like 100 miles across, some say it's 1400 miles across, and they're given in different positions as well, depending on what sources you read. 784 miles from Point Barrow, Alaska, and the centre of the polar opening would be located at 87.7 degrees north latitude and 142.2 degrees east longitude. From Point Barrow, Alaska, the perimeter would begin at 784 statute miles, and the inner continent, which I estimate to be located halfway through the polar opening, at 1413 miles. So it's somewhere over here, apparently, on this map. So they say that the hole isn't at exactly at the North Pole. So, you know, again, it just depends. You can't get an exact location of where this is supposed to be. So that's one of the problems. However, what is often presented as proof that we've got a hollow Earth are these two pictures. You'll see these come up pretty quickly in your Google searches and so on. This photograph was taken on the left on the 6th of January 1967 by the satellite ESSA-3, clearly showing the hole at the North Pole. And this photograph on the right was taken by ESSA-7 again on the 23rd of November 1968. There is almost no cloud cover, and the fields on the surface can be observed, and the hole at the North Pole can clearly be seen, so it says. However, you shouldn't take things at face value, even when you have these pictures. I mean, they are old pictures by current standards, of course. And then, of course, you see other pictures. Said that there are no shots of the North Pole directly over the pole, right? And these are from an ESA site. This picture's come from an ESA site. I've got the link at the bottom there. Oh, look, there's a hole there. They've left a hole in the map, folks. They're hiding. There's a cover-up. They're covering it up. And that's Spitsbergen there. And look, more cover-up, because there's two more shots with holes here. However, let's go back to these earlier pictures, which are claimed to be photographic proof. Now, clearly showing the hole at the poles. If this is the case, then it's nothing short of remarkable, as the North Pole is in complete darkness at this time of year. Right, because this is January. Remember, it's in the Arctic winter. So, nothing short of remarkable. And there are other extremely suspicious things about this photograph. Not just the hole, but the entire visible hemisphere of the Earth is in sunlight, and this is clearly impossible unless the pole is oriented directly towards the sun. Remember? So we should either see this half, you know, in shadow and this half in light, or, you know, some proportion of that. Okay, so at no time during January 1967 was the entire northern hemisphere simultaneously bathed in sunlight. And if the interior of the Earth is illuminated by a glowing ball of plasma, the central sun, 600 miles in diameter, why don't we see a bright disk instead of a dark hole? What's obscuring that very bright sun, which is very close, remember? And the answer is it's a composite photograph. It must be. It's made up of a picture of the, you know, one taken maybe 12 hours apart and then joined together. So we know that that's a composite picture. Must be. Same applies to this one. And also, if the hole is there, then why don't we see pictures from satellites in July of the same year? Why don't we have pictures, you know, of the poles from 6 months later? So there are great big questions about what those pictures really show, and I think they've been taken out of context and used to point out something which is not true. I don't think they do show holes in the poles. I think they show an incomplete composite where the satellite hasn't gone over the pole. So you couldn't say from that whether there was a hole there or not, but we'll come back to that. And again, I've heard this said, I had to check out this claim. People say, oh, there aren't any pictures of the North Pole from space taken from satellites. Well, there's one. I found it without too much searching. Such true colour views of the North Pole are quite rare, as most of the time much of the region within the Arctic Circle is cloaked in clouds. Right? So there is cloud there quite a lot, but you can get clear pictures of the ice. When that was taken, I haven't got the date on that, but I've got the link there. I think that, oh sorry, yeah, it was May the 5th, 2000 that was taken by the Terra spacecraft. So there you go. So yeah, I found one. So I'd heard of scientists on the radio saying there were no pictures of holes of the North Pole from satellite. Well, I found one. It took me about 20 minutes, probably less. I'll skip this because I'm going to come back to that. Seismic information. Although not visually observable, the core of the Earth is observable by vibrations. And we'll come back to this. Primarily from earthquakes passing from one side of the planet to the other. Using this method, geologists have been able to establish the structure of the mantle, outer core and inner core known today. A hollow Earth would behave entirely differently in terms of seismic observations, as I was saying at the beginning. Now, one of the things we can't definitely say that the Earth isn't hollow because nobody's dug down deep enough into it. Because the deepest hole I found that's ever been dug, or drilled rather, is 7.6 miles deep. Right, so that's the deepest we've actually been down under the surface where we live. And it's a Soviet Kola super deep borehole. I've got a slide of this, I think, which I'll come back to. But one of the big problems with the whole hollow Earth theory is it's quite simple to explain. It's not easy to think in terms of density rather than gravity. Well, let's just take this as a typical example of a hollow Earth sort of model, right? So we've got the central sun in the middle. This is like air or a vacuum, depending on what you read. And then we've got the crust on the outside, right? This shell of a crust. Now again, this can be 300 miles thick, 400 miles thick, 700 miles thick. It depends which web pages you read, basically. But even taking the thickest version of 1400 kilometres, right, you can work out the density. In other words, we know how much the Earth weighs. We have to know how much it weighs because if we didn't, you wouldn't have satellite navigation systems. Because if we didn't know how heavy the Earth was, we wouldn't know where to put the satellites for GPS and so on, and you wouldn't have working satellite technology. You wouldn't have this stuff. We wouldn't have been able to send probes to Mars and so on. We didn't go to the moon. That's a different story. I'm not going to go into that tonight. I've got a DVD about that if you want to know about that. But separate issue. The density issue is pretty conclusive because if you work out the thickness of that and then work out the density that that material would need to be to give the Earth the mass that it has, to make it as heavy as it is, then that would need to be solid osmium, which is the most dense element, which is denser than lead, right? So that crustal material would need to be denser than lead for the inside to be hollow and the rest of the Earth to weigh the same as it does now. So that's why, really, just on the face of it, the hollow Earth model just doesn't stack up. And these elements like osmium, for example, it's called, or iridium, they're called rare earth elements because they're rare. There's not much of them. So it just doesn't stack up. And that's the borehole, as I mentioned a couple of slides ago. It's the building here. It was abandoned in 2008. Project was closed. I think they stopped drilling. Where did they stop drilling? After 24 years of drilling was stopped because it was getting too hot inside. So it does get hot down there. 12.3 miles deep. That's their little team photo for getting 12 kilometres down. So there you go. You can read about the Kola super deep borehole if you want. Now then, and another thing that you tend to read is that, oh yeah, well, the reason why we can't have these pictures of the holes is satellites never fly over the poles. Well, I've essentially already shown you that that's not true, but let's just say that it is true. And this is what you read sometimes. Since no polar orbiting satellite can go over the polar opening, the only conclusion is that the no-fly zone for polar orbiting satellites is where the polar opening is located. It is an area about 500 miles centred over the pole, directly down from Northland, Russia. And that's from a website called Our Hollow Earth. I've read things like that in one or two places, but this was the one I picked out. And people have asked if planes can fly over the poles. Oh, no, you can't fly a plane over the pole, because what happens is you'll get the military will come in and they'll divert you away and blah, blah, blah. Well, is that true? Well, I was able to get something from the horse's mouth, because I've got a friend called Don Daniels. He lives in Colorado, and guess what? He's a pilot. He flies civilian aircraft. And I wrote to him and says, okay, have you ever flown near the North Pole? And he actually wrote back. I was really chuffed with the response. And he says, we are not allowed to fly directly over the North Pole. The stated reason being that the older navigation systems on, for instance, the B747 would get temporarily confused as to which south to reference to. Newer navigation systems, like on the B77, mathematically switch to the poles, from the poles to the equator, when we are far north or south, and thus there is no ambiguity. However, they tell us not to even ask, as we will not get permission to deviate directly over the pole, as it would be considered a gross navigation error. So that's all he said. It's a gross navigation error. They don't get, escorted and landed and blah, blah, blah. I have been within 60 miles of the North Pole on a number of occasions, and while it is surprisingly smoggy or hazy, I should have been able to see an opening of any significant size. And in 2006, he took some photos, and he was 58 miles from the pole. And this is the cockpit display. Here we go. It says North Pole there, look. I think there's some figure on here on the next one where it says he was like 58 miles, I think, from it, or 60 miles. And this is, again, the cockpit display. And I noticed this number in this picture, N225UA, which is UA is United Airlines, and that's the flight number. So that's his plane. And again, I think it says North Pole there, just on that, but you probably can't see it from where you're sitting. So he actually took pictures, and this is his plane. That's the plane. That's his actual plane. And that's the view he got. So that he's flying 58 miles from the pole, looking towards the North Pole. And he says, no hole there, folks. And Don Daniels has written a book. He asked me, because he sent me these pictures and took the trouble to send me this, he asked me to mention this, so I am mentioning it for him. Don Daniels is into all these sort of alien stuff. He's had various experiences. I've met him. He's an interesting guy. He's written a book called Evolution Through Contact, which is available on Create Space, Becoming a Cosmic Citizen. He sent me a copy. I haven't read it yet, but it looks like quite an interesting book. So it's just been published this year. So if people want to check that out, fair enough. Okay, well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about Admiral Byrd for a bit, and then I think after this we'll have a bit of a break. Because again, if you Google Hollow Earth, one of the first things that will come up is Admiral Byrd. So what did he discover? Well, he was on Operation High Jump, but he was doing other things as well in early years. In 1947, the US launched a well-equipped expedition to Antarctica to follow up on earlier expeditions. Okay, a film about this was made, and it was called The Secret Land. The Secret Land film documents the largest expedition ever undertaken to explore Antarctica, and it was codenamed Operation High Jump. And the film was made by the US Navy, and it involved the Operation High Jump involved 13 US ships, 1 submarine, 23 aircraft, and 4,700 men. This was a big expedition, a lot of people involved. The film was shot by photographers from all branches of the US military, and the purpose of the expedition was to explore and photograph several thousand square miles of inland and coastal areas that had not been previously mapped. Additionally, military planners wanted to evaluate whether military troops could successfully perform against an adversary in such an environment. And I've edited a clip together from The Secret Land, because it's got one of the key pieces in it which people say shows the entrance to the inner Earth, and I'll tell you why that's not true, basically. And this is a bit staged. You'll see this is staged. So if you think this bit is staged, well, yeah, obviously it is staged, the first bit. James Forrestal, a very interesting character. Another 10 bonus points for anyone who knows that name and why it's interesting.
There is only one untouched reservoir of raw materials left in the world, and that's in the region known as Antarctica, an area larger than the combined area of the United States and Europe. The American government is sending a naval expedition that region. The purpose is to train our Navy in polar operations so that it may better perform its function of preserving the peace upon the seven seas of the world. Beyond that, the American government is seeking to do its share in the discovery and the release to the world of the unknown treasures of Antarctica in the interest of all mankind.
Thumbs up to this gentleman. The Secretary has approved our plan, confirming you, Admiral Byrd, as the officer in charge of the expedition, and you, Admiral Cruzen, as the task force commander. And we get everything we need. That makes Operation High Jump the greatest polar expedition in history.
Admiral, time is going to be our greatest handicap. By the time we get through this very difficult ice pack, the summer will have ended and the fall will have set in. Never before has anyone attempted to take a fleet of thin-skinned steel ships through 300 miles or more of crushing ice pack.
I have great faith in your skill, courage, and determination. Now, gentlemen.
Admiral Nimitz reviews the operations plan. The expedition will comprise 3 groups: a central land plane group to explore the interior from Little America, and 2 seaplane groups, the eastern to map that half of the continental shoreline, and the western to map the opposite coast of Antarctica. After the original orders have been issued, 3 months of planning are needed to organize the giant venture.
This is Robert Taylor speaking. At the world's greatest naval base, Norfolk, Virginia, ships of the Central and Eastern Group are loading. The flagship, Mount Olympus, equipped with powerful radio and radar, will serve as the leader's voice of command. Admirals Byrd and Cruzen come aboard to check staff preparation, food, fuel, and clothing for 4,000 men. Byrd greets staff officers who have fitted out the expedition. Not a few vessels, but a fleet. Officers and men, not hundreds, but thousands, and pilots by the score.
"1,500 miles west of Little America, the Currituck and her western group are off the Shackleton ice shelf, circling the Sunset Coast. The western group commander, Captain Bond, gives pilots and plane crews a last briefing on Antarctic dangers and the technique of survival if forced down. The flight about to start is the longest and most important so far for the western group. Before takeoff, survival gear is checked. Gear to keep 9 men alive for 100 days. Food, drugs, sleds, sleeping bags. On the water, the great TBM makes her takeoff run. Her jet assist bottles blast. She lifts quickly into the air and circles the Currituck once. Jet assist bottles, their work done, are dropped and make a salvo splash. The pilot, Commander David E. Bunger, wipes his frosted windshield, a constant source of trouble in polar flying. He is over the Shackleton ice shelf, named for the great English explorer who kept returning to the Antarctic until death, so often escaped, kept its rendezvous with him. The smooth shelf roughens. Dark rocks, called nunataks, appear above the ice. Then rugged mountain ranges as far as the eye can see. Bunger leans forward in amazement. His eyes have caught a sudden and unbelievable change in scenery. The universal white has turned to chocolate brown, dotted with blue. A cameraman goes into action. 300 square miles of land without snow. Land that might be in New Mexico or Arizona. Pictures alone will prove Bunger has discovered a warm oasis in the shadow of the pole. It is for such supreme moments as this that men brave the hardships of exploration. The astounding, undreamed-of fact is that they are over a chain of warm water lakes, whose shores, except for small patches, are free of ice and snow. Commander Bunger circles the largest lake in sight, 5 miles long. He comes in to make a landing. Water temperatures must be recorded. Samples taken. He finds the water fresh, the temperature 38 degrees Fahrenheit. On the shores are vast deposits of coal and of minerals of the utmost importance to civilization.
So there you see the plane landing on a freshwater lake. It's not quite in the middle of Antarctica, but well into the Antarctic region. And And basically what's happened is, I think much has been made of this ice-free area, and some people said, oh, well, that's obviously warmer there, so that's where the entrance to the Hollow Earth is. That's certainly been, that sort of thing has certainly been put there. And also there's actually a volcano as well on Ross Island, which is in the sort of northern part of Antarctica, I think. So you're going to get a slightly warmer region around the volcano itself. It's called Mount Erebus. So the bedrock had water pockets that guided the building of stations there, and it carries the name Bungus Hills after the high jump pilot who first flew over it. So this warmer area is well known. It's called Bungus Hills, and they actually established a base there as well. I'll mention that in a minute. But let's now go back to the story of Admiral Byrd, because we do know from this film and all that was in it that he visited the South Pole in 1947 as part of this expedition. But also, what is just only briefly mentioned in the film is he had a flight over the North Pole on May the 9th, 1926. So he was a well-seasoned polar explorer. And I have to point out as well that I found out, not surprisingly, he is a Freemason. I mean, did more or less expect that from somebody in that high in the in the military. And he also had an expedition to the Antarctic. He had two, 1928 to 1930 and 1933 to 1935. So he was well experienced in exploring these polar regions, which is why he got the job. Okay, so the operation made front page headlines around the world with reports about the Admiral's personal movements broadcast around the world daily from January the 2nd until his return to America on April the 14th, 1947. So that date's important. This would have made a North Polar flight during this time damn near impossible. You remember on that picture of the cartoon thing, the comic art thing, it showed Admiral Byrd's North Polar flight in 1947. Didn't happen. Never took place. So the first mention of a 1947 North Polar flight by Admiral Byrd can be found in the book Worlds Beyond the Poles, Physical Continuity of the Universe by a controversial self-proclaimed scientist called F. Amedeo Giannini. On page 13 of his book, under the heading The Changing Scene 1927 to 1947, he presents lists of things that happened during those years to support his theory of Admiral Byrd's flight. February 1947, this is Admiral Byrd's secret diary saying, I'd like to see that land beyond the pole. The area beyond the pole is in the centre of the great unknown. Rear Admiral Richard Byrd before his 7-hour flight over the land beyond the North Pole. Well, he couldn't have made that flight, as we say, because it was at the South Pole at that time. In 1928, Admiral Byrd published his account of the 1926 North Polar flight in a book titled Skyward. And on page 196, Byrd reveals, when our calculations showed us to be about an hour from the pole, the North Pole this is, I noticed that through the cabin window a bad leak in the oil tank of the starboard motor. When I took the wheel again, I kept my eyes glued on the oil leak and the oil pressure indicator. Compare this information to the following passage from the so-called secret diary of the 1947 flight. Slight oil leak in starboard engine, oil pressure indicator seems normal, however. Once again, the odds of Admiral Byrd having the exact same problem with the exact same engine on two different flights 11 years apart would probably be about the same chance of you winning the next lottery. And then also what happened was, in this secret diary there is a passage where Admiral Byrd has gone into the inner earth, he meets these people, and I'll read that, I've got these in the wrong order really. In the secret diary of Admiral Byrd, the passage reads, Yes, my son, replied the master of these people. The dark ages that will come for your race will cover the earth like a pall, but I believe that some of your race will live through the storm. Beyond that I cannot say. We see a great distance, a new world stirring from the ruins of your race, seeking its lost and legendary treasures, and they will be here, my son, safe in our keeping. So that was from this supposed secret diary. However, in the 1937 film, which was a few years before this book was written, Lost Horizon, there is a master in this story. The master says, yes, my son, you, my son, will live through the storm. You will preserve the fragrance of our history and add it to a touch of your own mind. Beyond that, my vision weakens, but I see in the great distance a new world starting in the ruins. But in hopefulness, seeking its lost and legendary treasures, they will be all here, my son, hidden behind the mountains under the blue moon, preserved as if by miracle. So it's like the guy who wrote this secret diary of Bird was copying from the script of Lost Horizon. That's what it looks like. So that whole story is just made up. Or so it appears, anyway, that's what it would appear. And there's a bit more on that thing as well if you go to the various web pages. So Bungus Hills, they set up a base. The Russians set up a base in '56. This is this, warm area, and you can see where it is. I did a little Google thing here. Look, ooh, look at this. It's really cool, Google Earth. If you've never used it, that's where it is, and you can actually see. You've got a clear area there, lakes and stuff. Had a bit of a wander around here, and that's in Antarctica. So you can get a clear area there. And then I think I've zoomed out. That's the sort of north coast. Or maybe it's the east coast, but yeah, I've zoomed out a bit and then you can see a bit of the ice sheet. They're taken at different times of year, those sets of pictures. So there you go, you can see it. So, is there a base at the South Pole? Well, yes, there is.
Slowly and uncomfortably, we draw nearer to the pole.
South Pole, 58 Juliet Hotel, do you copy, over?
58 Juliet Hotel, South Pole.
Roger, we're about 15 minutes out inbound. How's your weather?
I have a couple of pieces of information for you. When you land on the skiway, you'll see a number 9 marker and recommend to pull off well off the runway and park the plane there. How copy?
Yeah, you're coming in 5 square there.
Roger that, and I've got one more little piece of information here. There is no certified runway or airfield available, and the U.S. government cannot authorize a landing. How copy?
Roger, we copy that.
Okay, have a good landing.
So we're brought down to Earth. The goal of our 5.5-month journey is within our grasp. But the radio conversation with the base is a reminder of an awkward truth. No one really wants us here.
Well, here it is. We've landed at the South Pole. Or at least tantalizing close. The only thing is I don't quite know where the pole is. So I'd better go and ask.
This is definitely not what I expected. It's a cross between the moon and a marshalling yard in the Midwest. I see domes and aerials and dishes and pylons, but I see no pole. How ironic it is that at the center of the world's most unspoilt wilderness, the needs of science have created a building site. But where's the pole? Perhaps it's kept indoors to stop it getting knocked over by bulldozers. Only one way to find out. This is the heart of the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, established by the Americans 35 years ago. It's an extraordinary feat, proving that even at the most inhospitable place on Earth, life as we know it can survive. Outside, the temperature is 30 below. In here, they can wear Bermuda shorts and eat chili and blueberry pie. This summer, there's a record number of 120 scientists working